"Ma'am, you need to leave. Now." The officer's sharp command echoed through the tense courtroom. Olivia Carter stood her ground, gripping her legal documents as murmurs spread through the crowd. "I have the right to be here," she said firmly, refusing to back down. The judge's gavel slammed. "Not anymore. Bailiff, remove her." Sergeant Ryan Calloway stepped forward, ready to escort her out. But before he could lay a hand on her, the courtroom doors burst open. A breathless clerk rushed in, holding a folded note. "Your Honor," the clerk's voice wavered, "there's a call for you. From the White House." The room fell into stunned silence. The judge hesitated. The officer froze. And in that moment, Olivia knew everything was about to change. The courthouse in Brookhaven, Georgia, was a swirl of anxious energy that Tuesday morning. People formed lines along the polished marble floors, each waiting for their turn before a judge known for an icy stare and a penchant for swift judgments. The black metal detectors beeped incessantly, scanning each person's bag and body for the slightest signs of contraband. From the outside, the building radiated the timeless authority of the legal system. Grand columns, massive wooden doors, and an American flag swaying in the gentle breeze. Inside, though, was a boiling pot of fear, tension, and desperation. Young lawyers rushed by in crumpled suits, files and briefcases pressed to their chests. Families huddled in corners, whispering prayers for leniency. The courthouse staff typed away at a furious pace, updating records, answering phone calls, and directing the human traffic. Signs reminded everyone to keep silent in the corridors, a tall request in the face of the countless whispered debates about bail, fines, charges, and pleas. Even the air smelled of anxiety, a mix of old paper, stale coffee, and sweaty apprehension. Amid all this rushed confusion, one figure stood out. Olivia Carter. A tall black woman in her early 40s, she wore a modest black blazer and a white blouse, her hair neatly braided. Her eyes were resolute yet tinged with weariness. Olivia's presence commanded attention, though she spoke quietly. She had fought many battles in her life, from a rough upbringing to countless professional struggles, yet this moment felt heavier. She was here to testify in a civil case related to a workplace discrimination lawsuit. Her own. Olivia had been terminated from a prestigious marketing firm, claiming blatant bias. And now, her day in court had finally arrived. The corridors smelled of tension and official polish, like the faint odor of lemon-scented cleaner that failed to fully scrub away the underlying grime. Olivia clutched her legal documents, feeling hope and dread swirl together. She had prepared meticulously with her attorney, determined to stand up for what she believed to be right. But Olivia had no idea how drastically her life was about to change. Tucked in the corner of the same hallway was an officer of the law, Sergeant Ryan Calloway. Tall, muscular, with a pronounced jawline and close-cropped hair, he carried an aura of authority. Though he wasn't new to courthouse details, something in his posture that day signaled tension. Olivia noticed him glancing her way, as if singling her out from the moment she set foot in the building. The hearing was scheduled for 9:30 a.m. in room 306, a chamber known for Judge Eleanor Whitmore's stringent approach. Olivia slipped into the wooden pews as her attorney, Mark Reynolds, an idealistic middle-aged man known for championing civil rights cases, gave her a nod of support. The opposing counsel, representing the marketing firm, cut a stark contrast. Slick hair, expensive suit, the confident smile of someone who believed he held all the cards. Before the session began, Olivia noticed Sergeant Calloway step into the courtroom. His gaze swept over the seats, ultimately landing on her. There was no immediate reason for concern. Officers often monitored proceedings to maintain decorum. Yet his eyes held a certain hardness, as if anticipating something. Judge Whitmore, robed in black and armed with an imposing stare, emerged from her chambers. The gavel struck. The usual formalities were exchanged. Olivia's heart pounded in her chest. She'd been waiting for this day, to present her evidence, her personal testimony, proof of discriminatory emails, data showing she was passed over for promotions time and again, even though she outperformed colleagues. She wanted justice, not just for herself, but for the countless others who had been silenced by corporate machinery. As the hearing progressed, tensions rose. Olivia's lawyer presented slides of her performance reviews, glowing recommendations from former clients, and the abrupt shift in her evaluations after a new manager took over, one who had allegedly made racist remarks behind closed doors. The marketing firm's counsel sneered, picking apart each piece of evidence, painting Olivia as a disgruntled employee looking for a big payout. Judge Whitmore seemed unmoved by Olivia's emotional testimony. The judge's eyes flicked between the screens, the lawyers, and Olivia herself. Olivia wondered if Whitmore harbored her own biases. Her expression remained cold. Gradually, an air of impatience permeated the courtroom. Olivia felt an unsettling sense that she might be fighting an uphill battle. Then came the unexpected confrontation. As Olivia finished her response to the opposing counsel's cross-examination, she requested permission to address the court again, citing new evidence. The judge, exasperated by the length of the hearing, rolled her eyes and snapped, "That's enough, Ms. Carter. You've had your time." When Olivia tried to clarify, repeating that she had crucial new emails that the defense had not disclosed, the judge's frustration flared. "I said enough," Whitmore raised her voice. "If you speak again out of turn, I will have you removed from my courtroom." Something in that exchange, in Olivia's unwavering determination not to be silenced, lit a spark. Sergeant Calloway, who had been standing near the door, immediately took a step forward, as if waiting for an excuse to remove Olivia by force. Judge Whitmore's patience finally snapped. She pointed a finger at Olivia and announced, "Since you cannot follow instructions, Ms. Carter, I am ordering you to leave." Her gavel slammed down again, echoing through the courtroom. An audible gasp spread among the handful of observers. Mark Reynolds leaped to his feet, trying to calm the situation. He explained that Olivia was under stress, that the new evidence could turn the case around, and that there was no disrespect intended toward the court. His words fell on deaf ears. "Bailiff, remove Ms. Carter from my courtroom now," Judge Whitmore declared, using the official title for the courthouse security. Sergeant Calloway took that as his cue. He advanced toward Olivia with a look that plainly revealed he was more than willing to proceed. Olivia felt her world tilt. This was her chance to finally speak on record about the injustice she had suffered. Being thrown out meant her testimony could be discredited, her evidence ignored. Desperation gripped her. She opened her mouth to protest one last time, but Sergeant Calloway loomed over her, handcuffs clinking ominously at his belt. "Ma'am," he said sternly, "you need to leave. Now." And then, the courtroom doors burst open. A breathless clerk rushed in, holding a folded note. "Your Honor," the clerk's voice wavered, "there's a call for you. From the White House." And just like that, everything changed. Judge Whitmore's face darkened as the entire courtroom held its breath. The words "White House" carried a weight that even she couldn't dismiss. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, then extended her hand. The clerk placed the note in her palm with a nervous glance. The judge unfolded it, her eyes scanning the brief message. Whatever she read made her lips press into a thin line. Then, without another word, she stood abruptly. "We are going into recess," she declared, voice sharper than before. "All parties remain in the vicinity. This court is adjourned for 15 minutes. A stunned silence filled the room. The bailiff and Sergeant Calloway exchanged puzzled glances. The opposing counsel looked visibly unsettled. Mark Reynolds, Olivia's attorney, blinked in confusion but quickly recovered. "Your Honor," he began, but Judge Whitmore cut him off with a sharp look. "Recess," she repeated firmly, before gathering her robes and marching toward her chambers, the clerk following close behind. A murmur rippled through the courtroom as people began whispering to one another, speculating on what had just happened. The name White House hovered in the air like a live wire, electrifying the uncertainty. Sergeant Calloway, still standing near Olivia, tensed as the clerk suddenly reappeared and walked straight toward him. "Sergeant," the clerk said in a hushed but urgent tone, "the judge needs you in her chambers. Now." Calloway frowned. It was unusual for a judge to summon a court officer so directly. He gave Olivia one last glance, her expression wary but defiant, before turning on his heel and following the clerk out of the courtroom. The judge's chambers were lined with dark wooden furniture, shelves brimming with thick legal volumes. A heavy atmosphere clung to the room as Judge Whitmore sat stiffly at her desk, a phone receiver pressed to her ear. "Yes, Mr. Secretary," she said, her usual authoritative tone replaced with something more deferential. "I understand. Yes. Yes, I will see to it immediately." She glanced at Calloway as he entered, her expression unreadable. "Yes, sir," she said one final time before setting the receiver down with deliberate care. For a long moment, she simply stared at her desk, as if absorbing the weight of what had just occurred. Then, she looked up, meeting Calloway's eyes. "That was the White House," she said quietly. Calloway felt a jolt of disbelief. He had heard correctly in the courtroom, but hearing her confirm it made it all the more surreal. "Olivia Carter," Whitmore continued, tapping a finger against the desk, "has garnered the attention of the administration. Someone very high up wants to ensure her testimony is not cut short." Calloway's stomach twisted. He recalled the subdued dignity in Olivia's eyes, the frustration in her voice when she tried to present her new evidence, and the way he had just placed a hand on her arm, preparing to remove her. Now, he was being given a direct order to reverse that action. "This changes things," the judge said, her voice wavering slightly. "I need you to find Miss Carter immediately and bring her back into the courtroom. Uncuff her if you have to. Do whatever it takes." She exhaled slowly. "We are to resume the hearing as soon as possible." She met his gaze, her eyes sharp with unspoken warning. "And we are to give her every courtesy." Calloway blinked, his pulse quickening. The irony did not escape him. Minutes ago, he had been ready to escort Olivia out. Now, he had been tasked with ensuring she stayed. "Yes, Your Honor," he said, struggling to keep his voice neutral. Judge Whitmore grabbed a thick file from her desk and flipped through the pages. "Sergeant," she said, lowering her voice slightly, "I don't know what you overheard, but keep this confidential." Calloway gave a slow nod. "The call was from the Secretary of the Department of Justice," she continued. "The administration has taken an interest in Miss Carter's case. They made it quite clear there would be consequences if her right to a fair hearing was compromised." Calloway swallowed hard. This wasn't just an internal courthouse matter anymore. "I'll bring her back, Your Honor," he managed to say. Then he turned and walked out of the chambers, his mind reeling. One moment, he had been enforcing the court's decision. The next, he was under direct orders from the White House. Power was shifting in ways no one had anticipated. Sergeant Calloway moved swiftly through the courthouse corridor, scanning for Olivia. The usual courthouse bustle was in full swing. Lawyers chatting in corners, families anxiously waiting for updates. Then, near the exit sign, he spotted her. She was leaning against the wall, arms crossed over her legal documents, her face tense. A single tear slid down her cheek, but she quickly wiped it away. Calloway approached, his boots clicking against the polished floor. Olivia noticed him instantly, her body tensing, as if preparing for another fight. Before she could speak, he raised a hand in a subtle peace offering. "Miss Carter," he began, his voice gentler than before, "you're requested back in the courtroom." Olivia's eyes narrowed. "By whom?" "The judge," Calloway answered, glancing around nervously. "There's been new information." She studied him for a moment, suspicion clear on her face. Why the sudden change? Calloway hesitated. He couldn't mention the White House call. "I can't say," he admitted, "but the hearing is resuming, and the judge specifically wants you back." Olivia glanced at the elevator, then down at her phone. No messages. No calls. She thought of her mother's old adage. Sometimes justice comes from places you least expect. She met Calloway's gaze again, weighing her options. Then, with a curt nod, she straightened her shoulders. "Fine," she said. "Let's go." Side by side, they walked down the corridor. The dynamic between them had shifted irreversibly. Onlookers who had witnessed Calloway march Olivia out earlier now gawked in confusion. Some whispered among themselves. By the time they re-entered the courtroom, tension crackled in the air. The moment Olivia stepped through the doors, all eyes turned toward her. Judge Whitmore was already seated, flipping through papers with an expression of forced composure. Mark Reynolds, still at the plaintiff's table, looked up, his face a mixture of relief and curiosity. The opposing counsel, on the other hand, looked as if they had just been blindsided. Judge Whitmore cleared her throat. "Miss Carter," she said, gesturing toward the plaintiff's table, "please take your seat." Gone was the harshness in her tone. It had been replaced by something else, a strained civility. Mark blinked in stunned silence before quickly gesturing for Olivia to sit beside him. As she stepped forward, her heart pounded. This was a stark contrast from being ordered out just minutes ago. Once she settled, Mark leaned over, his voice barely a whisper. "What the heck happened?" Olivia whispered back, "I have no idea." She glanced once at Sergeant Calloway, who had moved to stand near the back of the room. For the first time since their confrontation, his posture no longer seemed rigid with authority. Instead, he looked conflicted. Judge Whitmore tapped her gavel lightly. "Counsel," she said, "you may continue." And so began the second act of a hearing that was no longer just a legal battle. It was now under the watchful eye of a power far beyond the courthouse walls. The possibility of genuine justice glimmered once again, and Olivia Carter, who had come so close to being silenced, was finally about to be heard. A hush fell over the courtroom as Mark Reynolds gathered his notes, adjusting to this sudden shift in momentum. "Your Honor," he said, his voice steady but laced with curiosity, "we would like to reintroduce the new evidence that Ms. Carter was prevented from presenting earlier." Judge Whitmore nodded, her expression impassive. "Proceed." The opposing counsel stiffened in their seats. They had been confident just moments ago that Olivia would be silenced, removed, and rendered irrelevant. Now, the tides had turned in a way none of them had anticipated. Mark wasted no time. He walked to the evidence screen and pulled up the email chain that Olivia had uncovered, memos and internal communications from her former employer's executives. The emails, once dismissed as irrelevant, were now front and center. On the screen, phrases leaped out in glaring clarity. "She might not be a fit for our clients. Her style is a little urban. Keep her from high-profile accounts." A fresh wave of murmurs spread through the courtroom. Olivia felt her breath catch. Even though she had seen these words before, the impact of them being displayed in a courtroom, a place where truth was supposed to matter, hit differently. Judge Whitmore leaned forward slightly, her eyes scanning the text. For the first time that day, Olivia saw something close to discomfort flicker across the judge's face. The opposing counsel stood abruptly. "Objection, Your Honor. These emails are taken out of context." Mark didn't even look at them. "These emails, Your Honor, show a clear pattern of discrimination. They are not out of context. The metadata verifies when and where they were sent, and we have 2 former employees willing to testify that similar language was used internally to justify Ms. Carter's termination." Olivia's heart pounded as Mark continued. "This is not just about one employee. This is about a culture of bias, one that punishes Black professionals for simply existing in spaces they have earned." Judge Whitmore exhaled sharply, her fingers tapping against her desk. "Counsel, do you have any rebuttal?" The defense attorney hesitated, then forced a tight smile. "We request a brief recess too." "You had ample time to review these documents earlier," Whitmore interrupted. "Objection overruled. The evidence stands." Olivia stole a glance at Sergeant Calloway. He was watching the proceedings intently, arms crossed. Their eyes met briefly. He knew. He knew she had been telling the truth all along. The hearing continued for another hour as Mark meticulously laid out the case. 2 former colleagues had quietly submitted written affidavits, confirming that Olivia had been treated differently. They spoke of private meetings where executives questioned whether clients would respond well to her. They described the shifting attitudes after her new manager took over, the slow but deliberate attempts to push her out. The courtroom was silent as Olivia took a steadying breath and finally spoke. "This is not just about me," she said, voice trembling slightly but filled with conviction. "It's about the next woman who walks into that office, the next Black professional who works twice as hard and still gets overlooked. These emails prove what I have been saying all along. They show a pattern of discrimination, and that pattern will continue if no one stands up to it." The weight of her words hung in the air. Even Judge Whitmore looked affected, though she masked it well. The opposing counsel, visibly rattled, pushed back weakly, claiming the emails were isolated incidents, that the company had diversity initiatives in place. But the damage was done. By the time the hearing wrapped up, it was clear. Olivia Carter's case was no longer just a lawsuit. It was a symbol, a battle for justice that had reached the highest levels of power. As the judge banged the gavel and announced a recess, Olivia let out a shaky breath. "We've got them on the ropes," Mark whispered to her. "Hang in there." Outside the courtroom, the courthouse buzzed with speculation. Word spread quickly about the emails, about the judge's sudden change in demeanor, about the call from Washington, D.C. By the time Olivia and Mark stepped into the hallway, reporters were already gathering, whispering among themselves. Camera crews adjusted their equipment, ready for a statement. Olivia's phone buzzed. A text from an old college friend. "Turn on the news. Your case is making headlines." Her stomach flipped. She had entered the courthouse that morning expecting a quiet battle. Now, her name was being spoken across the country. "Let's keep moving," Mark muttered, guiding her toward a quieter corner near the vending machines. "We need a strategy." He pulled out his phone, scanning the latest headlines. Corporate bias case takes unexpected turn after White House call. Emails reveal racial discrimination at top marketing firm. Justice system under scrutiny. Did judge try to silence key witness? Olivia's hands tightened around her phone. Mark exhaled. This is a game changer. The DOJ is now watching this case closely. That means pressure. It also means leverage. She hesitated. Leverage for what? For making real change. She swallowed hard. "I never wanted to be in the spotlight like this." Mark gave her a small, understanding smile. "Sometimes the spotlight finds you." A voice from behind startled them both. "Ms. Carter?" They turned. Sergeant Calloway stood a few feet away, his hands at his sides. He looked different, less rigid, less sure of himself. Olivia tensed. "Yes?" Calloway cleared his throat. "I just wanted to say something." Mark immediately stepped closer, protective. Calloway raised a hand. "I just want to apologize." The words landed with an unexpected weight. "I was doing my job," he continued, his voice quieter now. "But I realize now how it looked, and how it felt for you, removing you like that. I'm sorry." For a long moment, Olivia just looked at him, searching for sincerity, and she saw it. No malice, just a complicated mixture of regret and discomfort. "I accept your apology," she said quietly. Then, after a pause, "But it doesn't undo what happened." Calloway gave a slow nod. "I know." He hesitated, glancing around before meeting her gaze again. "Good luck in there." Then he turned and walked away. Olivia watched him go, a storm of emotions swirling inside her. "People can change," Mark murmured beside her. "Or at least, they can acknowledge when they're wrong." She let out a breath. "Let's just stay focused on the hearing." Mark nodded. Agreed. But deep down, Olivia knew this wasn't just about the hearing anymore. This was about something much bigger, and the world was watching. Inside the courtroom, Judge Whitmore's demeanor had shifted completely. By the time court reconvened, the defense was on the defensive, desperate to contain the damage. They asked for a settlement discussion. Mark and Olivia exchanged a glance. They had the upper hand now. Olivia inhaled deeply. She had fought so hard to get here. Now, it was time to make sure this fight meant something. She straightened her back. "Let's see what they're offering," she said. And with that, the next battle for justice began. Inside a private conference room in the courthouse, Olivia sat across from a team of high-powered corporate lawyers. The walls were lined with legal books, and the air was thick with tension. A Department of Justice liaison had joined via video call, observing with a neutral but sharp gaze. Mark sat beside Olivia, his hands resting on a thick folder of evidence. Across from them, the defense team whispered among themselves, their polished appearances doing little to mask their discomfort. The lead attorney, a composed woman with a tight bun and an expensive suit, finally spoke. "Ms. Carter, we understand that this case has taken an unexpected turn. Given the new evidence, we are prepared to offer a substantial financial settlement as well as cover all of your legal fees." Olivia didn't react. She had expected this, a payoff to make her go away. Mark leaned forward. What about institutional reforms? The attorney pursed her lips. We are open to discussions about company-wide diversity initiatives. Olivia exhaled slowly. That's vague, she said, her voice calm but firm. What guarantees do I have that real change will happen? The DOJ liaison cleared his throat. Ms. Carter raises an important point. Given the nature of the evidence, external oversight might be warranted to ensure compliance with federal anti-discrimination standards. The defense team stiffened. They had been hoping to contain this. Now, it was clear they wouldn't be able to settle without conditions. Mark pushed forward. We want a real commitment. Third-party audits on hiring and promotion practices. Transparent reporting. Leadership changes where necessary. And a formal apology, not some empty PR statement, but an admission of wrongdoing. The room tensed further. The lead attorney's lips thinned. That's quite a list. And this is quite a case, Mark shot back. A heavy silence followed. Then, the defense team huddled, whispering urgently. Olivia could tell they were calculating, deciding what was worse, agreeing to these terms or letting this case continue in full public view. After several minutes, the lead attorney sighed and looked up. We need a recess to discuss. Judge Whitmore, who had been overseeing the negotiation, nodded. 30 minutes. As the defense team filed out, Olivia turned to Mark, her hands shaking slightly. Are we pushing too hard? Mark shook his head. No. If we settle for less, nothing changes. Olivia took a deep breath, her mind racing. If she won this battle, it wouldn't just be for her. It would be for everyone who had ever been pushed aside, dismissed, or silenced. This was bigger than her now, and she had no intention of backing down. When the defense team returned, their faces were strained but resigned. We're prepared to meet most of your demands, the lead attorney said. A multi-million-dollar settlement. Full coverage of legal fees. A third-party diversity audit over the next 2 years. Olivia and Mark exchanged glances. That was more than they expected. But, the attorney continued, the apology will be carefully worded. We cannot admit to systemic discrimination without exposing the company to further litigation. Olivia felt a flash of anger. Even now, they were trying to protect themselves. She folded her arms. Then I decline. The room went still. Mark looked at her, his expression unreadable, but he didn't interrupt. The defense attorney's jaw tightened. Ms. Carter, you're in a strong position right now. But if you refuse this deal, you risk a drawn-out court battle. Olivia held her ground. I don't need just an apology for myself. I need accountability. I need an admission that this wasn't just an unfortunate misunderstanding. It was wrong. Silence. The DOJ liaison spoke up. From a federal perspective, a stronger admission of liability would demonstrate good faith. If this case were to proceed further, that could influence potential investigations into wider corporate practices. The pressure was clear. Finally, the attorney sighed. We'll revise the language of the statement. Minutes later, a new draft of the agreement was presented. The apology was no longer vague. It stated that Olivia had been subjected to unfair treatment due to racial bias within the company. It acknowledged systemic issues and pledged corrective action. When Olivia read the final words, her eyes burned with emotion. She had won, not just for herself, but for others. She picked up the pen and signed. News of the settlement broke within hours. Headlines exploded across media outlets. Marketing firm admits racial bias in landmark settlement. Olivia Carter's battle for justice reshapes corporate policies. DOJ oversight to ensure workplace equity following discrimination case. Social media erupted with discussions about workplace discrimination, systemic bias, and the power of standing up against injustice. A trending hashtag appeared almost instantly. Hashtag Justice for Olivia. That night, Olivia sat in her living room, staring at the screen as news anchors discussed her case. A text from her daughter, Maya, popped up. Mom, you're trending again. People are calling you a modern Rosa Parks. Olivia chuckled softly. That felt like an exaggeration. She had never sought to be a symbol. She had only wanted fairness. But now, it was clear. Her fight had become something much bigger, and she was ready to embrace it. A few days later, As Olivia stepped out of a cafe, she heard a familiar voice. Ms. Carter. She turned. Sergeant Ryan Calloway stood there, dressed in plain clothes, looking uncertain. Sergeant, she greeted, cautious but composed. He hesitated, then spoke. I just wanted to say, I've been thinking about what happened that day. Olivia studied him. I asked for a transfer, he admitted. Community relations. I want to do better. She blinked. That was unexpected. I'm not expecting anything from you, he said quickly. I just thought you should know. Olivia nodded slowly. Thank you for telling me. They stood in silence for a moment, then Calloway extended his hand. She looked at it, then shook it. Maybe people could change. Maybe this was just the beginning. A week later, Olivia returned to the courthouse. Not for a hearing, not for a battle, but to witness the formal implementation of the oversight policies her case had inspired. A small crowd had gathered. Activists, community leaders, even business executives who had been forced to acknowledge the need for reform. As she walked up the courthouse steps, someone in the crowd called out, "Thank you, Olivia." She turned, smiling. This wasn't just her victory. It was a step towards something greater, and she was ready to take the next one. As Olivia Carter stepped inside the courthouse once more, the weight of the past weeks settled on her shoulders. But this time, she wasn't here as a plaintiff fighting for recognition. She was here as someone whose voice had been heard, someone who had helped spark change. The courtroom was packed. Civil rights leaders, legal experts, and corporate executives sat in tense anticipation. Today, the company that had wronged Olivia would officially announce its commitment to reforms under the scrutiny of the Department of Justice. Judge Whitmore presided over the session with an expression of forced neutrality. The court recognizes that the parties have reached a settlement, she announced. The company has agreed to new oversight measures, including third-party audits on hiring and promotion practices. A murmur rippled through the room. Olivia had fought for these exact measures, real, tangible changes that couldn't be swept under a PR campaign. And, Whitmore continued, her gaze flickering toward Olivia, we have a formal statement from the defendant acknowledging the discriminatory practices that led to Ms. Carter's wrongful termination. The corporate attorney stood, holding a prepared statement. His voice was stiff, but the words mattered more than the tone. The company acknowledges that Olivia Carter was treated unfairly due to implicit biases within our organization. We recognize that systemic discrimination played a role in the decisions affecting her employment. As part of our commitment to change, we will implement independent oversight and training programs to ensure that such injustices do not occur in the future. Silence. For a moment, Olivia barely breathed. It wasn't just an apology. It was accountability. It was a statement that would live in corporate records, preventing history from being rewritten. Judge Whitmore tapped her gavel. With this resolution, the case is now formally closed. A wave of relief washed over Olivia. It was done. Outside, a crowd had gathered. Journalists, activists, and even everyday citizens who had followed her case closely. As Olivia stepped onto the courthouse steps, the flashes of cameras were blinding. A reporter called out, "Ms. Carter, how does it feel to win?" She thought about that for a moment. Did this feel like winning? No. It felt like progress. "I'm grateful the truth finally came to light," she said, her voice steady. "I hope this encourages others to speak up. This victory isn't just for me. It's for everyone who has ever faced discrimination and been told to stay quiet." Cheers broke out in the crowd. People held up signs, "Justice for Olivia," and "Equal work, equal respect." Mark Reynolds, standing beside her, leaned in. "You just made history." Olivia smiled. "We all did." In the weeks that followed, Olivia found herself at the center of a national conversation. She was invited to speak at diversity panels. Civil rights organizations reached out, asking for her insight. Even companies that had once ignored discrimination issues were now scrambling to revise their policies. And in the middle of it all, Olivia made a decision. With Mark's help, she founded a consulting firm dedicated to fighting workplace discrimination. She would use her experience, her battle, to ensure that other employees wouldn't have to go through what she did. She started small, speaking to HR departments, training managers, reviewing corporate policies. But the demand kept growing. Soon, companies were reaching out voluntarily, seeking her expertise before a crisis forced them to act. Her case had been a warning to corporations everywhere. Now, she was part of the solution. One afternoon, while reviewing a new client proposal at home, Olivia received an official-looking envelope in the mail. The seal at the top made her breath catch. Department of Justice. She opened it carefully. Inside was a letter signed by a high-ranking official, commending her for her role in exposing workplace discrimination. Your courage and determination have not only led to justice in your own case, but have also set a precedent that will help countless others. The Department of Justice thanks you for making workplaces across the nation more equitable and just. Tears welled in her eyes as she read the words. For so long, she had fought to prove that her experience mattered. Now, the highest levels of power had acknowledged it. She set the letter down carefully on top of the settlement papers, a symbol of how far she had come. Outside, the rain clouds parted, revealing a streak of golden sunlight. In the distance, a faint rainbow arched over the city skyline. A sign, Olivia thought, of something new, something better. And with that, she picked up her phone, ready to continue the work she had started. Because this wasn't just her victory. It was the beginning of something far greater, and she was just getting started.